Bryan Fischer here for D1 Ticker. Thrilled to welcome in Ross Dellenger of Sports Illustrated. And we're chatting a couple AD searches today in a very special edition here of D1 Extra. And Ross, I think everybody talking nowadays about Auburn, that doesn't really change from the last couple of weeks or a couple of months there on the plains. But when we kind of first back up a little bit in terms of this search for a new AD at Auburn, it eventually landed with John Cohen. What did you kind of hear about that whole search process going down there on the plains that eventually landed them to Mississippi State's AD?
Yeah, it was certainly an interesting one. I think they did have, it sounds like they had a pretty big array of candidates, and it sounds like the search firm that ran it, which I believe was Turnkey, they really wanted a sitting Power Five AD, and I think Auburn kind of wanted that, and that's what they pursued. I think it's kind of been out there publicly now, but they pursued and it sounds like offered the job to Hunter Yurchek at Arkansas. I think there were probably a couple other Power Five ADs in play, and then four or five kind of group of five ADs, names like John Hartwell and Eddie Nunez and Benedict at UConn, and of course the interim Rich McGlynn, who will remain there as the deputy. So they seem to all kind of be in the mix, and throughout the process, I think they were telling candidates that this is a new Auburn where the influence, the boosters, and the board will not be in control, and the new AD will have full control and assurances that they'll have control of the athletic department and the coaching search. So we'll see if that happens. They obviously at the end they narrowed the search to a SEC West rival, which we've seen happen quite a bit. The SEC loves the SEC, and I think that is the third Mississippi State athletic director who's now at another SEC school. You had Ross Bjork also go to Texas A&M. You had Texas A&M AD Scott Woodward go to LSU. So we've seen this quite a bit. It'll be interesting to see if this one works.
It certainly makes for easy times and an easy transition there when they meet up in Destin or some of the other meeting places, during the year. But specifically with John Cohen making this move, you wrote a little bit about NIL and that being a potential driver in this change for him. He is an MSU alum, as you mentioned. I mean, how much did it kind of come down to those three little letters, NIL, though?
Yeah, and I think this is going to be something we probably see quite a bit moving forward. Already, we see how NIL is impacting the transfer portal and players transferring and moving around. I think we're going to see it more with coaches. Maybe we saw it a little bit more with coaches last year. We had some pretty big, splashy type of moves that maybe don't happen if NIL is not in existence. Talking about the Lincoln Riley move, Brian Kelly, even Mario Cristobal. And now we're going to see maybe moving forward a little more administrative moves because of NIL. And not to say that's the only reason that John Cohen left Mississippi State for Auburn, but in general, obviously there are more resources there. There are more resources to get players, and you need players to win championships, and there are more resources to hire coaches, and need coaches to win championships. So I think it's NIL is one part of it. It's a big part of it, but I think we'll probably be seeing that moving forward. When coaches and athletic directors and administrator types have decisions of moving schools, I think a recruiting footprint, history and tradition, facilities, overall booster engagement, resources, donors, all of that is a consideration. And I think now, you're going to, even for the AD level, you're going to have another consideration. It's going to be NIL and going to be that school's collective efforts when it comes to NIL.
And certainly some new guidance around that from the NCAA. So it's always top of mind for a lot of administrators nowadays is NIL. But first item on the agenda when John Cohen gets to Auburn and gets there on the plains officially is going to be hiring a new football coach. That was kind of taken care of before he officially took the job. No surprise there that the former head coach of a baseball team didn't want to kind of meddle in terms of actually firing some of the coaches. But Bryan Harsin on the way out, we kind of understood that was going to happen at some point around Auburn. But does this kind of signal any kind of direction that search might take to replace Bryan Harsin now that John Cohen is kind of installed there at Auburn? His last hire, and it resulted in Mike Leach. So he's gone a little bit out of left field as well. Do we have any kind of sense in terms of what direction he might take this football search?
Yeah, John is he's real meticulous about his searches. He keeps crazy notes before. I've met with him in the past, and he's shown me all these stacks of notes and everything that he keeps, and he's real detail oriented. So you would think that he would have a really in depth, full kind of search. You certainly hear a lot of names out there, and also the big question too with this is how is he going to lead the search? Is he going to be making the decision? Because at Auburn, just like a lot of places, the athletic director doesn't have full authority sometimes to make these type of decisions. It's the president, it's boosters, donors, board people in Auburn. That's been the case for quite some time is their involvement. So you wonder how much they'll be involved. I think that's going to be a huge question to answer. That'll tell us a lot about how this search will go. I don't know if we'll ever get that answer until after the search. So we'll see what happens there. But yeah, he has hired kind of when you look at some of his hires, they're a little bit outside the box. They're a little bit out there. Some have worked, some have not. He hired the baseball coach at Mississippi State that won the school's first national title, but before that, he hired a baseball coach that lasted a year and had some issues crop up. Joe Moorhead lasted 2 years, his first football coaching hire, and then he hired Mike Leach, which things seem to be going fine. It takes Mike a little while to build up, but this right now, as of now, this seems to be his best season that they're having. So I would think that John Cohen will drift toward an offensive mind, maybe a creative offense and all that stuff. And that seems to jibe with some of the names you're hearing, like Lane Kiffin, like Hugh Freeze, and then you hear, Matt Rule's name. Those seem to be the three that you hear the most. I just don't know where it will go because I think it's based on if John Cohen is really kind of in command, and I don't know that we know that he's necessarily in command yet of this search. If there's anything we know about Auburn is that they have a lot of outside influence in the athletic department, and it's been that way for 30 or 40 years. And no matter how much they say it's changing, you kind of have to see change before you believe it.
Yeah, I mean, in Bryan Harsin's kind of farewell statement, he kind of spoke to the alignment there on the plains in particular. That was, I think, a line that a lot of people kind of caught when he released that statement. But John Cohen being in the state of Mississippi, you mentioned some of those names. A lot of them do have Mississippi ties. You have Deion Sanders there at Jackson State. Obviously, Lane Kiffin is the current Ole Miss coach. You have a former Ole Miss coach in Hugh Freeze. Does that kind of help any of those people just having some familiarity across state lines, or does that maybe also kind of hinder some of them, knowing that John Cohen kind of knows not only what is being said publicly about some of those coaches, but also what's being said privately around that state?
Well, that's a great question. Because John, because of where Lane works now, and because of where Hugh worked in the state, specifically those two candidates, he probably knows more than most, just being that he was at Ole Miss's top competitor for so long. So I think he's well aware of how Lane Kiffin and Hugh Freeze both conduct their building and their staff and their team. Now I don't know if that would mean that he's against those men as being coach. I don't know if that's a benefit for them, but he certainly knows a lot about them, being that he coached in the same state. And, for those who don't kind of understand the dynamic between Mississippi State and Ole Miss, they pay quite attention to what the other is doing. And I think especially that's the case for Mississippi State when it comes to Ole Miss. There's a lot of attention paid to what Ole Miss is doing, who they hired, how they're conducting business, all that stuff. So I think he's going to know uh, a lot about those two candidates. And again, I don't know if that's good or bad for their candidacy, but he's certainly going to come in probably armed with quite a bit of opinions. And that's also the thing about Cohen is he's a former baseball coach, pretty passionate, fiery guy. And I just it's hard to see him getting kind of pushed around by outside influences. You know, I guess we'll see what happens there at Auburn, but I think he went there knowing that they're certainly trying to change the way they do business, and they seem to have given him assurances in some sort that he's going to have control. But we'll see.
You've covered the SEC for a long time, former MSU beat writer. You went to school there. What is it about Mississippi State that has been able to produce a lot of these ADs that have gone on to kind of quote unquote bigger jobs? Not only around the SEC but elsewhere. A lot of administrators have come through there. I mean, what is it about MSU in particular that I guess prepares people, kind of for another job?
Well, it's kind of good and bad. The way Mississippi State, resource wise, is obviously there are 14 SEC teams, soon to be 16, and they're arguably number 12 ish, 11, 12, 13, somewhere probably in that group as far as resources in a 14 team league. And then in a 16 team league, they're 15, 14, or 15. So they're on the low end. But I'll say, uh, they've done more with less a lot. They've kind of proven that it just, in some of their hires and the facility situation there, they've been known to do more with less. And they've just kind of become, because they're in the lower tier resources, because they're located in Mississippi, it sometimes can be a hard place to work, can be a hard place to get people to, could be a hard place to pay people. They've kind of developed into that, I guess, stepping stone a little bit. And, you know, people are always looking to get to the higher resource, I guess, places. Uh, in a way, I guess you could say it's a positive for Mississippi State producing those type of administrators that we see at bigger places now. But at the same time, you're kind of left in the dust by a lot of people, and it just keeps happening. And at some point, you really want to keep somebody, but that's just kind of the name of the game. That's how it's been there. And I think it's three ADs now, that former Mississippi State ADs that are now ADs elsewhere in the league. Two straight state alums that have moved on to other schools. So it's tough when you can't, when you're unable to keep a Mississippi State alum, especially like a Mississippian, like a Scott Strickland, to stay there. It's tough. It's tough for that fan base, and I think there's a lot of people kind of um, feeling it in a way this week about losing another one, and then even before that, losing Dan Mullen, obviously to Florida. So there's been some hits for sure.
I mean, if you're your school president, Mark Keenum, how concerned are you with that kind of clouding the search a little bit? I mean, are you going to kind of aim a little bit lower, just knowing that you can maybe keep somebody, or do you still want to kind of get out somebody that does have those MSU ties, knowing that this maybe they do look at it as a stepping stone, or try to find somebody that kind of says, what, this is more of a destination job.
I'm sure he would love to hire somebody that's going to be there for the long haul. Mark Keenum is a long haul guy. He's Mississippian, been there for I think 13 years as president, and I met with him just like a month ago actually, and I think he would probably be there for another 13 years. He gave that indication, so I'm sure he would prefer to have a long term person. in that might you would think that would take a person with Mississippi State ties, but again, we've kind of seen those people leave. So I don't. It doesn't necessarily guarantee that somebody's going to be there. And certainly there's a lot of interest in the job. Kind of already hearing today how many people have expressed interest in the job, and it's although it is a more lower resourced SEC program, it's still in the SEC, and they've kind of in a lot of ways, especially from a budget standpoint, Mississippi State has closed the gap between a lot of their other competitors and what it was just 6 8 years ago. The gap has closed a little bit financially, but it's still in the league, and everybody's trying to get to those two leagues. It seems like, right? Everybody's trying to get in the Big Ten. Everybody's trying to get in the SEC. So I think there's some interest from ADs, maybe even some sitting Power Five ADs that aren't in one of those two leagues.
Yeah, I mean, the financial disparities, I mean, you even if at the bottom end of the SEC, you're talking about, probably at the high end, if not exceeding, what the Big 12, the Pac-12, even the ACC, are able to offer in terms of certainly the media rights, revenue going forward. But you mentioned some of the names, possibly, kind of putting themselves out there who could end up being in the mix for this one. And are we gonna kinda see some of the same names that we saw pop up at Auburn? Or, could we end up, kind of really focusing on those sitting ADs in particular?
Yeah, I don't know that we're going to see a similar pool that we saw in the Auburn search. I kind of doubt it. You never know, but I kind of doubt it. And just knowing Keenum, I it feels like a person who wants to hire somebody with Mississippi State ties. And there's pretty obvious choices out there if you are going to hire somebody with Mississippi State ties. And there's three group of five ADs sitting group of five ADs that have ties to state. Jared Binko at Georgia Southern, and John David Wicker over at San Diego State, and Scott Weathersby, I think in Eastern Michigan. They all have ties to state. I think probably I would imagine that they're interested in the job. It would be certainly a move up, and for a lot of them, it would be kind of like returning home. So you can certainly see them. But if you want to branch out, um, there's certainly a lot of talented other ADs out there that have been in searches at Georgia Tech, have been in searches like you mentioned at Auburn, uh, and then who's out there Power Five wise that's outside of the league that would want to come back in. And I don't know those names yet, but I know there's probably significant interest from some people. So they'll have no shortage of pretty deep, pretty of candidates. So it's going to be probably a pretty deep pool of people.
We mentioned Mike Leach's name kind of earlier. What's kind of on the to do list, and would the presence of working with somebody who is, as interesting, I guess we could say, as Mike Leach, is that viewed as a plus? Is that, something that, might scare away a few candidates? I'm just kind of curious how you might think that might be viewed, walking into this job, especially with the high expectations that MSU fans have had the last couple of years. What was kind of on that to do list, and how might, other ADs kind of out there, take this job?
Yeah, I was in school there from '02 to '06, and I got the worst 4 years of Mississippi State football history. They won 11 games in 4 years. So the expectations have changed drastically from that time. And you got to give it to Dan Mullen. He really kind of set the bar of basically winning consistently 8 games a year, and that's what he did there. And I think that's the expectation level. The good thing for I think an AD coming in, one of the good things at Mississippi State is there's not an immediate at any of the major sports, men's basketball, baseball, women's basketball, football. And if you don't think baseball is a major sport in Mississippi State, then you haven't been paying attention much, right? But because it's huge, it's probably arguably their number two sport. And all of those coaches are somewhat new. They're all in, latest is probably Leach in his third year. Everybody's like in their first or second year. So there shouldn't be a lot of changes, but at the same time, all these people were hired by somebody else, and that can be awkward at times. But there shouldn't be a ton of immediate changes. And so the focus can be, on other things, building an administrative staff, facility stuff that they're always working on, the the new baseball stadium was built. It's pretty incredible. They're always tinkering around with the football stadium a little bit. The basketball is getting a facelift. There's a lot of good things going on there, for sure. And so there's but a big thing is there's not kind of an immediate need to start firing and hiring, so to speak.
It'll certainly be fun for us to follow along in terms of what's eventually happening there at Auburn and how things play out in Starkville. But Ross, thanks so much for your insight and for joining us today.
No problem.